So my presentation is really going to focus on a review of the efficacy of having targets and compliance versus doing it because you realize that there's value in diversity. And by doing that, we're going to look at first where we are in South Africa, generally in terms of employment. That's our starting point. Then we're going to look specifically at the situation of employment for persons with disabilities specifically. We're going to look at the efficacy, the utility of the Employment Equity Act, which is our most comprehensive. It's our oldest piece of legislation that came with targets. In 2005, already it came with a target of 2% representation of persons with disabilities in your workforce. And then we're going to look at the National Development Plan 2030, and we're also going to look at the DWDE Act and its potential efficacy in addressing holistically employment of persons with disabilities. So we're going to start with the National Development Plan of 2030. So the National Development Plan articulates a target of 7% of persons with disabilities in your workforce by 2020 and 10% by 2030. As I said earlier, we're going to see where we are generally in terms of employment, where are we going, and how do we hope to get there. But also, in answering those questions, we're also going to ask why. So, state of employment in South Africa, July 2019, the second quarter of 2019. Unemployment rate is now at 29%, bringing the total of people without jobs 6.7 million. And using the expanded definition, in other words, those that have stopped looking for employment, that have given up hope, we're standing at 38.4%. How do we compare to the rest of the world? South Africa has the highest rate of unemployment in the world. The next country after us is Spain with 14%. There are other countries below Australia. I've used cut-off point as 5.2%. Then the unemployment rate for youth is standing at 56%. Again, how do we compare to the rest of the world? We are the highest. In terms of youth unemployment rate, 56% for South Africa, which means 1 in every 2 young persons you meet, less than 1 out of 2, have some way of making a living, going to work every day, having a purpose, feeling the happiness at the end of the day. So, looking at employment, unemployment generally, let's look at persons with disabilities. I said the Employment Equity Act had a target of 2%. The Mining Charter has a target of 1.5%. And the DWDE Act, remember, is a voluntary measurement where companies decide that they want to trade with each other, and in trading with each other, you then get a rating, but it's not. You can't be penalized for not meeting the DWDE Act or the scorecard because it's voluntary. So unlike the Employment Equity Act, which is enforceable and punishable through fines, the DWDE doesn't have that. The Employment Equity Act, in 2003, employment of persons with disabilities was standing at 1.3%. In 2017, we are standing at 1.3%. It really depends on you, on the efficacy thereof. The Mining Charter, 1.5%, but let's look at the DWDE Act. In 2005, we identified 4 key areas of why there is this hesitance to employ persons with disabilities in companies. We found low priority given to disability at senior management levels within companies, poor championing of disability in companies, poor education and low levels of skills amongst persons with disabilities, poor recruitment strategies. Who has not heard, I don't know where to find them, and inaccessible public transport. So looking at those 5, this is why I am optimistic. So in terms of employment, you see that for generic enterprises, large enterprises, those with a turnover of more than 50 million, if you meet your 2% target, you get you get a score here of 2. So you get your points there. But in terms of skills development, now remember one of our barriers we identified earlier was poor education and low levels of skills. So the skills development here, if you look at line number 2, skills development expenditure on learning programs for Black persons with disabilities as a percentage of your leviable amount, you see if you spend 30% of your leviable skills development, you would get a 4%. You would get 4 points here. And then also you'll see bonus points. It's easy to get bonus points here if you actually absorb the learners that you took earlier. If you train Black persons, and also note that this element in the scorecard doesn't say train Black employees. It actually means you can also score points for training people outside of your company. So that's a very important change here. And then if you absorb them, you get 5 bonus points. The scorecard looks slightly different for qualifying small enterprises or those with a turnover of less than 50 million. But it also incentivizes skills development on people with disabilities internally and externally, and it incentivizes you for absorbing them. So I've talked about employment, I've talked about skills development. And then remember, this is not really the focus of my presentation, but in terms of the scorecard, you also then have your SED component. So your social enterprise development component, that allows you to address inaccessible public transport or inaccessible transport. If you use that component as a way to ensure that people are able to get to work, then you have those 3 elements that has a more holistic potential method of addressing employment other than Employment Equity Act, which came merely with a target. Now, coming to the difference between compliance and respect for diversity. It has been proven over and over again that companies who have diverse workforces are able to make better decisions because they are able to look at different perspectives at the same problem. So if your company wants to be more competitive, you cannot overlook this sector of the population because you will then it's not very strategic to overlook 15% of a target of any market. That's not very smart. So talking about diversity, ethnicity, religion, thinking style, and disability. And here we say, until we can manage diversity, we can manage nothing else. I know people still want to know how. So the 6-point step. Number 1, where do you start? Commitment. Commitment to diversity. Establish a long-term commitment from leaders, CEOs, managers to buy into your targets, your goals, and get them to buy into disability employment. Number 2, conduct a workplace audit. Conduct a physical audit of the environment according to universal access principles. Conduct a numerical audit and culture to identify numbers, practices, trends, and progress. Number 3, secure resources in terms of time and also human resources. Step 4, develop a framework that addresses recruitment to retirement, taking into consideration career advancement and all of that. Step 5, integrate with other people processes. At the end of the day, persons with disabilities, we are just people. Number 6, build capacity through continuous education and disability campaigns. More knowledge makes us realize that we are actually just the same, that we have the same dreams, the same vision, the same hopes. So educate, educate, educate. Build capacity and build internal mechanisms.